Henry VIII's reign was a storm of power, passion, and merciless ambition. Once the embodiment of Renaissance brilliance, he was charming yet cruel, romantic yet ruthless, a man who inspired devotion only to repay it with death. The Golden Prince, who had once symbolized England's hope, became a figure of fear, his every whim a decree of life or death. This is not just the story of a king. It is the story of shattered dreams, desperate pleas, and the echoes of the innocent who fell beneath his iron rule. Henry VIII was a man who burned with love until that love turned to ash. No one knew this better than his wives. Anne Boleyn had been his obsession. He had torn England from the Pope's grasp for her, abandoned his loyal wife of 20 years, Catherine of Aragon, and defied the world to place Anne on the throne. Yet when she failed to give him a son, love curdled into resentment. The king, once intoxicated by her wit and fire, now found her defiance intolerable. When whispers of infidelity reached his ears, he seized them as truth. Anne was arrested, her pleas for mercy lost on a man who had already moved on. Locked in the Tower, she must have felt the walls closing in. This was the same place she had entered in triumph as queen. Now, she awaited the blade. On May 19, 1536, she stepped onto Tower Green, her once glorious future reduced to a blood-stained scaffold. She trembled but held her head high. The French swordsman, chosen for his skill, stood ready. Would it be quick? Would it hurt? The questions must have raced through her mind. She whispered prayers, but Henry was already celebrating elsewhere, the ink on his next betrothal barely dry. With one swift motion, the sword fell, and the woman for whom he had changed history was gone, discarded like a pawn no longer useful to the game. If Anne Boleyn's execution was cold calculation, Catherine Howard's was sheer tragedy. She was just 19, a girl whose laughter once filled the halls of Hampton Court, who danced with innocence, unaware that the man she had married was a monster. When Henry discovered her affair, his rage knew no bounds. Catherine was dragged screaming from her chambers, her cries echoing through the corridors. She begged for her life, pleading for mercy that would never come. On February 13, 1542, she faced the scaffold. Unlike Anne, she had no time to prepare. Her body trembled as she approached the block, her breath quick and shallow, the cold wind biting at her skin. This cannot be real. This cannot be happening. Before kneeling, she whispered, "I die a queen, but I would rather have lived as a beggar's daughter." Then the axe came down, severing a life that had barely begun. Legend says her ghost still haunts Hampton Court, running down the halls in terror, still pleading for a mercy that never came. Henry's hunger for power reached beyond his marriages. It devoured England itself. His dissolution of the monasteries was not simply a political act. It was the destruction of a way of life. Monks and nuns who had spent their lives in prayer were dragged from their homes, their sacred spaces looted, their relics burned to ash. Ancient churches were torn apart, the walls that had echoed with hymns now rubble beneath the boots of Henry's men. Some resisted. The Pilgrimage of Grace, a massive rebellion of commoners and nobles alike, rose against Henry's tyranny. They believed his promises of negotiation, but Henry lied. When they disbanded, he struck. Their leaders were dragged to their deaths, some hanged, others drawn and quartered, their heads placed on spikes to rot in the wind. Their bodies swayed in the air, a silent warning. Defy the king, and this is your fate. For Henry, faith was nothing but a tool to be bent to his will. The corridors of Henry's court were a place of whispered secrets and hidden daggers. Even his closest friends were not safe. Sir Thomas More, once the king's trusted confidant, had loved Henry like a brother. Yet when he refused to recognize Henry as head of the church, his fate was sealed. More was thrown into the Tower, his health failing, his spirit worn thin. But he would not bend. On the day of his execution, He walked to the block with quiet dignity. His final words were a dagger to the heart. "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." Then, the axe fell. Even Thomas Cromwell, the very architect of Henry's power, was not spared. He had built the kingdom Henry ruled, orchestrated his marriages, crushed his enemies. Yet one mistake was all it took. When Henry found his new wife, Anne of Cleves, unattractive, he turned on Cromwell. The man who had once controlled England was dragged to the Tower, abandoned by all. On July 28, 1540, Cromwell was led to the scaffold. The executioner was incompetent, striking again and again, hacking the once mighty minister to pieces. The same day, Henry married Catherine Howard. By the time Henry reached the end of his reign, he was a grotesque shadow of the man he had once been. His once athletic body had bloated to over 400 pounds, his legs ulcerated and oozing with infection, the stench of rotting flesh following him wherever he went. The pain made him more short-tempered, more ruthless, more paranoid. He lashed out at those around him, ordering executions on mere suspicion. No one was safe. Even the air in his court was thick with fear. On January 28, 1547, Henry VIII died. But there was no peace in his passing. He had once been adored, but in the end, his death was met with silence. No joyful bells, no mournful weeping. The great king was gone, leaving behind a nation changed forever, stained with the blood of those who had dared to stand in his way. Henry VIII was not merely a king. He was a force of nature, a man who inspired both awe and terror. His reign was one of love turned to ashes, loyalty repaid with betrayal, faith crushed beneath the weight of ambition. He had remade England, but at what cost? His story is one of contradictions, a ruler who built an empire yet destroyed so many lives, a man who was worshipped in life but feared in death. Even now, his name lingers in history like a specter, a warning of what happens when power is unchecked, when a man believes himself above all others, even God.